This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Methodify by Delvinia. Get real-world customer feedback in hours, not weeks. Schedule your demo and get a free $20 Starbucks gift card. Go to methodify.it/BeanCast and methodify it today. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 583, Diseased and Sexist. For Monday, March 9th, 2020. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norp. Thanks for joining us. COVID-19 is disrupting lives and commerce globally, and the ad world is bracing for the worst. However, few of us have any real grip of what the coronavirus's impact will be on our business. So tonight we look at the facts and try to chart a path forward. Also, whether dissing influencers is sexist, our thoughts on Twitter fleets, the state of women in advertising and marketing, plus this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder of the Antipodean Immersive Tech Production Consultant, Ms. Michelle Excel. Hi, Michelle.
Hey, Bob. Hey, Bob. It's been a while.
I know, it's been a long time. I'm glad you finally got back on the show.
Yeah, and I'm very happy to be on this day. So
yes.
I got lucky in the roster.
Yeah, International Women's Day. So we'll be talking about that in a little bit. Now, also with us, we have the founder and principal consultant of Scott Monty Strategies, Mr. Scott Monty. Hi, Scott.
Hello, Bob. It's a pleasure to be back here with you.
Pleasure to have you on the show as always. And finally, we welcome senior editor covering agencies for Adweek, Mr. Doug Zanger. Doug, hi, how are you?
Hi there, Bob. How are you? That's a Swirsky old school Saturday Night Live reference for people. So Chicago Bears and Bulls, if you're so inclined to look at it.
I do. I know that skit very, very well. That's because I'm old.
Me too. Yeah, ditto.
Well, we've got you on the horn, so I want to start with your story because the coronavirus, more formally known as COVID-19, is not just impacting our physical health. This week, it became painfully obvious that it would be severely impacting our economic health as well. And as we all know, when the economy is floundering, advertising takes a hit, and we're all worried about that. But the most fascinating aspect of examining the impact on ad land is that the news may not be all bad for us. And there's a lot of upside to this as well as downside, plenty of downside to go along with it. So, Doug, Friday, you published in Adweek what I think is probably one of the most cogent and expansive looks I've read on the subject. You really looked at it from all angles. You went very, very deep and broad and kind of gave us some good perspective on what's happening right now. So take us through your thoughts and tell us a little bit about what you wrote about.
Yeah, and I got some help from my colleagues, Minda Smiley, Kelsey Sutton, and Jason Lynch from Adweek. And what we looked at were a few areas, and I think we excluded, not excluded, but we didn't necessarily look at brands. We looked at brands through the lens of ad spending in television. We looked at experiential marketing. We looked at agencies, and we looked at production companies. So we just looked at those areas because it felt like those were places that we were hearing the most good, bad, and ugly about all of this. And we just wanted to see where everything shook out. And I think before I get into this, clearly it's still, there's a lot going on and it changes every minute, every day, every second. And so though I appreciate the very kind words, this is the tip of a very interesting iceberg that no one really knows how big it is, to be quite frank. But starting from the top, we learned that television might actually be okay here. And there are a couple of things at play. And the first is that NBC and Comcast, NBC Universal, it looks like it's moving ahead with the Tokyo Summer Olympics this year. Now, that of course could change, but at present, it looks like that is a strength that is driving some continued revenue. There's the idea of people who maybe aren't going out as much, or likely not going out as much, flocking to TV, and that provides a safe haven for consumers. But it's also a benefit for the network. So you're seeing a lot of action and news, and obviously in those areas. But an interesting point was a flock potentially to feel-good programming. So I know everybody on this podcast is a Hallmark Channel fan.
Oh, all of us. I watch it religiously.
Right,
I mean, it's
right.
on speed dial.
Yeah, right. So networks like that could do really well. And again, the caveat to all of this is that it is way, way, way too early to tell. So at present, I think there's some bullishness in TV and OTT and streaming just across the board. I think there's still some bullishness, but we'll have to wait and see how that shakes out. Now, experiential.
Now, before we get on to experiential, I want to talk about this media question, because there seems to be just a little bit of disconnect over the media, whether media is going to take a hit or it's going to do really well in this circumstance. I mean, brands seem to be signaling that they're going to be pulling back on ad spend. Yet you point out the very, again, cogent points. Staying inside means more people will be watching TV or spending time on their computers. So brands might be smart to take advantage of this. And I'd like to open this up to the rest of the panel real quick. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously we're looking into a crystal ball, and there's no way to know, as Doug said, whether or not there's going to be any opportunities for TV to flourish in this particular situation. But is it a viable conclusion that TV could do well, Scott, considering the fact that everybody's going to be kind of scared at the same time, and brands are going to be pulling back because people aren't going to be buying their products? So, I mean, is one going to wash the other away?
Well, I think that's just it, Bob. I mean, certainly while there may be certain sectors that will be inherently affected by this, travel sector, certainly as we've been seeing, events, and when brands begin to shift their budget away from those, or to simply shut down their commitment to those, the question will be, will they shift it toward digital media and programming, or programmatic, or will they simply hold on to it in abeyance to kind of wait this out and see what the market is going to look like for the rest of the year? I mean, I was in the deal-making space in pharmaceutical and biotech in 2001 when September 11th hit. And what happened then, particularly in the deal-making space, our clients were early-stage companies that had promising technology, and we were out hunting for financial and scientific partners for them. Everyone simply drew back and hoarded all of their available cash because there was so much uncertainty in the market. Now, I think there still is uncertainty with regard to COVID-19. However, there are more avenues to spend that media dollar, whether it's not in events now, and it is in television, or it is in digital, or it is God forbid, maybe even in print. We may see other avenues to doing that. I think the real question will be, if a lot more telecommuting happens, what'll happen to the podcasting industry as a result?
Oh yeah, I mean that's another thing to consider. But when you're thinking about podcasting, that's so much based on commute. It's just like, so I see exactly what you're saying. I mean, it's just like, without people in the commute mindsets doing telecommuting, they may not be listening to podcasts as much. Is that what? Am I understanding you correctly?
That's my thought, because I mean, I work from home, and I know I do a lot more listening when I'm out, having appointments or going to lunches or things like that, or traveling from city to city. And when I'm only working from home for an entire day, maybe I'll listen to 15 minutes worth of podcasting, and that's it.
It's funny because I'm the exact opposite. I listen to a lot more when I'm at home than when I'm in a work environment. And I don't tend to listen to podcasts when I don't drive. So that's a big part of it. So take 80% of the population out of it straight away. But so the one adult who is also married to the other one adult who doesn't drive. But I listen to a lot of stuff background noise wise. And I think that with the advent of smart speakers and home assistants, we're seeing a lot more voice based and on command sort of voice interactions and podcasting happening with new generations of people who are using these devices in their home. So I see that it could go the other way. People could be, wanting more communication within their house because it's lonely working at home. And thankfully, I spend 8 hours a day on the phone, so I never get lonely, and I have a dog. But, working for myself and having recently moved back to my home office, I have stuff on background all the time. And when I'm making lunch, everything, so it sort of starts to replace human interaction somewhat.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see an interesting change in the relationship with podcasting. I think it's going to be really interesting to look at the stats on maybe which devices and where people are evoking them.
Now,
listening to them.
Fascinating.
Getting back to what we were talking about, I want to go back to Doug here because you were going to bring up experiential marketers and their potential risk. I mean, this is something in the article that was really eye-opening for me because you don't necessarily think about it when you're not directly involved in the experiential space, just how much your entire industry depends upon people getting together and maybe even touching each other or being close to each other or communicable with each other. This is a really potentially problematic thing for this whole space, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that, well, first off, obviously South by was canceled on Friday. And not going to lie, I was planning on going, but not going to lie, it's actually nice to just stay home in Portland while all this is going on.
Yeah.
But further, just looking at experiential as a practice within the industry and where brands are going, experiential, there's such a premium being placed on experiential among brands, taking out the B2B side of it, looking at the B2C side of it. A lot of brands are looking at looking at experiences, and I think that as optimistic as people can be about taking some of these physical embodiments of experiential and translating them into digital, I think I think you lose something with that. I think if you try to force the idea of experiential using air quotes here for something that should be, and there are exceptions, but if the first step of it was, we want to do an activation in Santa Monica on here, if it started as that and then it needs to convert, I'm not just saying, I'm not talking about things that originated as digital experiences, but being able to pivot to that, it's difficult because there's talk of, well, can we do South by online? Well, not to be crass about it, but that starts feeling like a webinar. And you start talking about other conferences that are saying, well, we're gonna transfer this over into a digital experience, and it's like, yeah, it feels like a webinar to me. So I think that what I'll be interested in, I think the B2B side of it we'll figure it out, and I think there'll be some uptick if there are events that are classically, again, B2B online, but it's the B2C space that I think is going to be really, really, really tough. And I'm hoping that it bounces back because we're in a fairly, in relative terms, nascent part of the history of experiential. I think it continues to grow in sophistication, and brands are identifying that. And my heart just breaks for agencies that are either experiential agencies or agencies that work a great deal in experiential. And my heart breaks for the brands too, because what do you do from here? And hopefully we'll be able to see a resurgence with this. But yeah, this one is billions and billions of dollars. We haven't even talked about Cannes yet. And, that's the French elephant in the room right now. And South by is a big domino, and the question becomes, well, is Cannes next?
Oh, there's so many big conferences on the horizon. I mean, you've got E3, you've got Comic-Con, you've got all these both Comic-Cons. Well, there's lots of Comic-Cons.
Seattle canceled. Yeah, Seattle canceled.
Postponed.
So, they'll postponed it. Okay, got it.
Well,
Yeah.
South by is kind of postponed as well. You know, it's still sort of up in the air. But no, you're right. I'm hoping, I'm actually still going to South by, which is ironic because I didn't really want to go this year to begin with and got talked into it. And now I'm actually still going and I'm going to make a holiday of it. I've had a heartbreaking story from a good production friend of mine who had 35 people touch down in the US yesterday. I can't say, of course, what brand or activation or anything it was, but for a big activation. And it's pretty heartbreaking. But
Yeah.
I'm really hoping that the experiential industry, you're right, it is nascent. We're just getting started. But already we're seeing a lot of experimentation, but I'm also seeing a lot of, hey, experiential's the new thing, so we need to do it, and a lot of quite lazy experiential. And I'm hoping that this is a real kind of not red flag, sorry, false flag, you know, like it's something that it's going to shake people out of their comfort zone.
Right.
Not to say coronavirus is a fake flag, sorry, using the wrong terminology here. Basically, this is a spanner in the works that's going to make people have to think differently about experiential. You can do experiential with individuals who aren't in the same place. I think that, you know, TikTok and Snap and the rise in a whole bunch of these really experiential social medias platforms are now starting to let us know that, where people are wanting to be active and actually act out and do things and not just post and repost and like and comment. And so I think that it's going to force people to be experimental. I'm also really hoping that, just like you said, when conferences go online, that they're not just going to turn into webinars, and that they are going to be looking at what tech is out there, from shared physical 3D spaces in virtual reality and augmented reality. We've already seen, you know, like the companies like Spatial and with Magic Leap and things coming out and saying, hey, we're perfectly poised to take this one for the team, you know, come onto our platform, start using these actual three-dimensional multi-person spaces that we've created. And this is a massive opportunity for 3D, VR and AR conferencing
Well,
platforms.
let's take that a little bit further, because I'd love to get the rest of the panel's opinion about that particular issue. That's something that Doug brought up, talking about the fact that not only that conferences are exploring this opportunity to maybe do virtualization of the conference experience, which is iffy, but agencies are canceling travel or saying non-essential travel shouldn't be involved anymore. Production houses are doing the same, and they're starting to experiment more with using the technologies that's been around for a while. You know, a conference meeting, digital conference meetings. Getting together on Zoom meetings and sharing presentation boards instead of going all the way out to the client. I mean, you know, Scott, there's a lot of efficiency and effectiveness in digital communication that has been kind of put to the side often at for the sake of getting that face-to-face meeting, that the face-to-face meeting is the way the business needs to be done. But now this is forcing us to look more seriously at these technologies and say, well, we have to incorporate them into the regular process flow. Do you think that's going to have any lasting impact on the industry, and will that be a better way to do business going forward?
Well, I hope it would. And the other thing I see being talked about a lot, I mentioned it before, is telecommuting. I mean, how long have people been doing the whole work from home thing? And it's really been more the exception rather than a regular kind of occurrence. And I would think, as we get used to this, and Doug, I'm painfully aware of what you talked about before, about everything just turning into a webinar. We certainly don't want everything to feel like that, but where we prefer to do things in person, let's say, well, maybe there's opportunities now simply because of efficiencies or because of travel restrictions, et cetera. We can do a pitch in a digital space, and we can make it more interesting. We can make it multimodal, multimedia. I mean, think back to how who was it? Was it Black Mirror a couple of years ago on Netflix? They did a whole choose your adventure kind of thing for viewers at home. Well, what's to stop us from creating pitches like that, or from creating presentations like that, or even webinars like that if we wanted to? We need to be more creative with the tools that we've had for ages, and to make it more interesting for people, because we're all going to be forced into this, like it or not. And now we have these wonderful things like Michelle was just talking about with AR and VR and immersive stuff, that to truly create an omni-media kind of presence via digital I think the opportunity is before us now, and we should see exactly how much of it we can make stick moving forward.
Well,
Definitely.
here's an issue too, is that AR, VR, all of these tools that we've been talking about for years, right? And I'm not discounting them at all, but to us, when we look at it, we will look at some of these tools and say, okay, that's cool. And it's like fruit stripe gum, where, okay, that was delicious for a minute and then the flavor went away. What's the practical application here? What's
Right.
this? What's that? What's that? So is this one of those turning points? And these are the discussions that we have every day among our editorial team at Adweek is, really what are the ramifications on this? So is this that moment where we see a use case that now accelerates? Because one of the challenges that I've found in my many years of muddling through this industry is, if you take a look at people who work in VR, the really, really smart people, far smarter than I am, and then you've got the marketing people on the other side, there's still this disconnect. And we haven't found that Esperanto that brings them all together. But is this the moment where a marketer looks at the tools that you and Michelle are talking about, Scott, and then say, okay, let's snap these together, and now we actually have the narrative that's going to accelerate this. It's not just a boutique-y thing. It's not something that looks like a nice to have as everyone's trying to still race to the bottom on CPM or whatever. But it could very well be a very interesting point. And the question now becomes, how is that effectively communicated out to the rest of the industry?
Yeah, I consult with agencies to bridge that gap between the immersive technology world, XR, and marketing and advertising, because they come from both backgrounds. And I try and use analogies to bring what's happening in enterprise and in XR, enterprise with XR and just XR in general, to the advertising and marketing industry. And there are co-creation tools out there that are far more powerful in 3D worlds than like literal life actually is. You can be standing next to somebody and say, you know what I mean when I'm meaning that there's this space here, and we could have this, the structure here, even for experiential marketing planning. You can literally build 3-dimensional objects, drawing, sketch, or pull in, and have the person that you're creating with see them at the same time. There are some incredibly, incredibly powerful tools that the XR industry has made. And I'm really hoping that you're right, that this is the catalyst that gets marketing and advertising agencies to look at them seriously. It's also a really amazing pilot. If an advertising agency is like, oh, we're kind of dabbling in XR, but we don't really understand it yet, start using it. Start actually using these tools. All of a sudden, like click, you're going to understand their benefit and their value. And then you can speak more intelligently on them to your brands, to your customers, and then in turn to their customers as well. So I think we have an amazing opportunity here. I'm just waiting for it to kind of click with the right. I
like your thought process there. The idea that it's not just about communication between you and your clients and you and your associates. It's also about inspiring you to see what's possible with the technology and maybe even influence the way creative gets done.
Yep.
Okay.
I've been wanting some traditional creatives to use this tech for a while, because it's just so different and so fascinating, and it really unleashes you. It allows you to draw in midair. I mean, that's pretty cool.
Bob, if we can bring this experiential part back to the original part of television and media that we were talking about before.
Sure, please do.
If we really get creative with this and everyone's cooped up inside, we'll have a new phrase on our hands. It'll be Netflix and chills.
Oh, too soon.
Dude.
Too soon.
Really?
I waited 20 minutes for my first pun. You guys should be thankful.
Well, before we hop off this topic, I do want to talk a little bit about what we most have to worry about. And I'm going to go to you, Doug, on this as our resident expert, I guess, since you've done the most research. I mean, what does the industry have to really worry about the most? Because we got to separate the fact from the fear and figure out what we have to be most concerned about dealing with over the next few months. So what would you say?
I would say that there is a naturally people will look at what's happening with coronavirus, COVID-19, that it will paralyze decision making. And there's enough disruption in the agency community as it is that, my hope is that agencies don't necessarily look at this as a distraction, because there are just some very obvious functional things that agencies, really have to look at. And this is really interesting, because I've had some conversations with people recently about talent, and I think a lot of times we associate talent with creative talent. And that's understandable in some ways because it's related to the output. But in some of the conversations that I've had with agency leaders and within holding companies, is they're looking a lot more at operational talent right now. And an agency or a holding company that has really strong operational talent, I think, will be able to help navigate some of the issues. Now, we're going to keep seeing more in the way of remote working and some of the more practical blocking and tackling, as it were. But I think that those agencies, companies, holding companies, however you want to describe it, who have really strong operational people that allow the agency to still retain the work that they're doing, and then look at where they're headed, and not veer into panic mode and have to make really big pivots, I think the better. So again, a lot of this is still so early. It evolves every minute, every day. And you have a lot of the holding companies they're really putting out statements and just saying that we're working on it. None really want to go on the record because they're publicly traded companies, and there's issues with that. But in some of these conversations that I've had with independent agency people as well, they said, well, yeah, for some of us, we've been doing remote working forever. And I think there's been a huge emphasis put on it, and understandably understandably so. But when you look at a very large enterprise, when you look at a 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 person company, again, it may be adjusting to a new normal, but the upside of it is that a really genuinely talented operations person might look at this and say, we saved money here, we were more efficient here, and be able to look at this as a good challenge. And as these agencies come out of it, they may find that the unintended consequence of this is that they were able to improve in certain areas because they were forced to.
Doug, I have a question for you along those lines. I think it's a brilliant analysis. And I wonder, when we're in the midst of, or on the cusp of, I should say, a global pandemic like this, obviously we can view that as a competitive advantage to certain agencies. But do you think there's a certain point, maybe there's a breaking point, where there's almost a public service that these agencies take, just in terms of taking the lessons that they've learned and changing their operations to adopt to the new normal? Is there an opportunity for them to share publicly their findings, or to create some sort of public service announcement along those lines to help other companies grapple with the same kinds of challenges?
One would hope that benevolence would spread among the world, but we'd have to see. And it's interesting you bring that up, Scott, because therein lies the opportunity for us as trade media at Adweek, and then the other publications around us, to really look at this and be that source of education. So on their own, I would hope so. I definitely would hope so. But I think that what's interesting is that we will look at this. It's still too early to see how long this is going to take to settle down. But I think part of our responsibility is looking in 3 months, 6 months, a year, and really start painting that picture with the industry and for the industry when it's merited. And that's just classic good old fashioned journalism, I suppose. But I would hope so. And I think the agencies that do that, I think that they will be repaid many times over in karma, and hopefully additional budget from their partners.
Yeah, and I also don't think that it's wasted effort, right? Because
Right.
If coronavirus sort of ends up not being as impactful as we thought, and things start to calm down, this is also about the future of work, remote working, fragmented teams, globalization. So any effort that we spend here in operations, and I absolutely love your points there, Doug, because there's a lot of operational work to be done at agencies. this is going to benefit regardless.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is hopefully we can learn some things, and then we can start tackling other issues that have been sitting on the back burner, like climate, which I've been hammering pretty hard, not necessarily publicly on adweek.com or in the publication, but I've just been saying that when you have existential threats like this, agencies, brands, all of these smart people in the industry, we're in the business of solving problems. And we're looking at this right now, what we have, and it is a genuine crisis. But for whatever reason, we keep sweeping climate under the rug a little bit. And the hope is that we learn some things, not just operationally and having robust businesses, but can we take pieces of this, build a template, and apply this to a big issue, which is the climate crisis. And that's a different podcast for a different time, but I thought I would point that out.
Yeah, it's a totally different subject, but a well-spoken point, something that we all have to keep it worried about. Well, I'm going to move on in just a minute, and we're going to move to talk about whether or not influencer marketing denigration, making fun of influencers, is really just sexism in disguise. It's an interesting idea that was put forward in Ad Age this week. We'll get to that in just a minute, but first I want to talk about our sponsor for this evening. Have you ever looked at an ad and said to yourself, how did this get approved? I mean, someone is going to get fired over this thing. Well, it happens more often than it should, but it doesn't have to anymore. We've talked about surveys and testing ideas and concepts on the show many, many times, and always came to the same conclusion that asking the wrong questions to your target market, or worse, asking the wrong people important questions, is the same as not gathering any information at all. Now, we all know the famous quote by Henry Ford about people wanting faster horses, but the truth is you need to be speaking to your customers. And that is why I'm pleased to introduce Methodify by Delvinia as a sponsor of the show. Now, Methodify, it's a great product. It collects real feedback from your actual customers in hours to give insight professionals and senior marketing people the information that they need to power better decision making. Now, some recent decisions that Methodify has powered include helping select which comedian would be featured in a national television spot for a major bank. Another one, testing digital creative before it was launched for a top 5 fast food chain. And another one, new pricing models for a software company you probably interact with on a daily basis. The use cases are endless here, and they're also valuable because the insights are coming from actual customer feedback within hours. Hear that, within hours instead of weeks. Now, to find out more about Methodify or to set up a demo, please go to methodify.it/BeanCast. That's Methodify, methodify.it/BeanCast. Yes, we are telling you to Methodify it. And as a way of saying thanks, just for being a BeanCast listener who signs up and completes a demo, we're going to offer you a $20 gift card from our friends at Starbucks. So again, this is methodify.it/BeanCast. Get a demo scheduled, find out more about this, get the free $20 gift card from Starbucks, and we thank them very much for their support of our program. Now, there was a really eye-opening thought piece in Ad Age that posits that denigrating influencer marketing is really just a veiled form of sexism. Now, some facts I didn't know, I think this is really salient to the argument. 77% of influencer marketing professionals are women. That was completely mind-blowing to me. It's something I didn't realize. Now, most of the influencer talent out there are women. That's something I did kind of know, but I didn't really think about very deeply. And the thing that we need to recognize about these people, all of them, they're strong business people. They're not just women, they're strong business people, tough negotiators, profitable, and they're effective for their clients. They're doing good work. So, Michelle, have we been too harsh on influencers? I mean, it's kind of like a running joke to say influencer marketing can go away tomorrow and nobody will be affected at all. But is that true? And should we be more respectful to the industry as being such a female-led industry?
Okay. It is. I've always loved influencer marketing. I've always loved its potential. So it's from some of the previous BeanCasts, you would have heard me speak up in defense of influencer marketing. So this is a subject quite passionate for me. I'm quite passionate about. So, influencer marketing at its core is real people getting a voice, showing themselves, and sometimes in pretty intimate and authentic ways. Not always, obviously, like we've all seen that. Really, not always. But I think we have to think about the good and the potential, along with the sort of the meh, or maybe some of the not great trends that it started. But the good, when it's good, is fantastic in influencer marketing. And I really think that it's been so good, and the potential has been so great that it's really rivaled and sort of ruffled the feathers of ad agencies' domination of marketing, creative and production. Because remember, it's creative and it's also production. It's also media, to be honest, but let's not get into that. Let's just focus on creative and production. So I think it's really rocked our notions, traditional advertising agencies' notions of what those things mean. What makes good creative? How do you produce things? So we're going to talk, one of the other topics later, we're going to talk about what still needs to change for women in the ad industry and it being male dominated still. I don't want to get too much into that, but because that's a topic later in today's podcast.
Go ahead.
I think you have to realize they're linked. If we're talking about traditional advertising still being male dominated and there still being a lot of sexism, that's directly linked to this sort of challenger movement that started that is female dominated. I think that look, I've always loved it. But the fact that it is so female led, there's a couple of things here as well, a couple of insights. Like, women judge women, they also judge men. But women judge women really harshly. Men also judge women really harshly. So I'm not surprised that influencer marketing gets a lot of scrutiny. The reason that it exists, the actual influencers themselves, the campaigns themselves, women's posts get criticized a lot more. And sometimes this is true self-expression. And I think that they get criticized a lot. Every single tiny little thing, from what they said to the way they said it, to what they're wearing, to what's in the background, to, are they too pretty? Are they not pretty enough? Is it overdone? Is it not authentic enough? And you don't see that level of criticism on a regular basis than you do on male posts. And that's the criticism comes from both men and women. So I think that a lot of women putting themselves out there is opening up for criticism and, of course, sexism. But we're also seeing, I think that women, when they're in advertising creative, get criticized. And also I think that their self-expression also sometimes gets restricted based on whoever's paying for that shoot, or that, whatever's being produced. It's their idea of what that woman should do. Yes, with men as well. But yeah, I mean, there's a story where from a friend of mine who works at a big company, and I won't say what it is, that uses a lot of brand ambassadors. And there was a female artist that was brought forward to be in a campaign, was brought forward by the team, internal team, and told that that artist is not pretty enough to represent the brand, which is really telling. I think that would happen at an ad agency. It also happens at brands. And I think that influencer marketing in general, I'm kind of all over the place here, sorry, but influencer marketing in general has given a lot of women who previously would not have a voice. And we see that across we see that across diversity, we see that across race, we see that across age, we see that across location, we see that across socioeconomic boundaries. Influencer marketing has helped a lot more people, and just general influencers and social makers, then we've sort of turned it into marketing. So I think that there's a huge number of touch points within this topic that we could scrutinize for the role of sexism in this. I'm not entirely sure where I'm going with all of this, but if anyone else wants to comment here.
Yeah, no, you're doing a great job, because you're giving a great perspective on this overall. I mean, yeah, the sexism in the industry, and I think it's fine to talk about this now, even if we are going to talk about it a little bit later. It's important to recognize that the agency world is still run by men. I mean, it's largely run by men. There's been a lot of advancement of women over the past few years. The 3% conference has done a great job of getting the word out and moving creative leaders out of the shadows and into the forefront. And a lot of good things have happened for women, but it's still a male-dominated industry, isn't it, Doug? I mean, it's something that is completely dominated by white men.
Yes. As a general term, yes. There is improvement, but it's not coming fast enough. It's still slogging along a little bit.
Well, let me clarify
But
the question then a little bit, because it's just like,
yeah,
because yes, it's dominated by men, but does that make the commentary about influencer marketing, the general malaise that people feel about dealing with influencers when you're at an ad agency, is that really just veiled sexism, or maybe not even veiled sexism? Is it just outright sexism because you have to deal with these women who are doing things that you personally as a man feel is degrading, and you don't want to be involved with that kind of advertising? You want to do high-minded art. Is that sexism?
yeah. I mean, there's so many things that have been for decades institutionalized in this industry, and sexism is one of them. And I just think I think the industry just still has huge issues with this topic around diversity, inclusion, and equality and equity. We just hired a reporter that is focusing on that space, and it's the first time that we've really hired, at least to my knowledge, in the advertising trades, hired somebody that's really digging into the topic. But these are things that have been institutionalized for decades, and I don't want to go back to. I mean, I'll go back 20 years. So I was in hip hop radio for 5 years, and if you see a picture of me, you'll say, "Really?" And then you look, but it was truly amazing, because the staff that we've had, and I've shared this story quite a bit. The staff that we had we were white, black, Asian, Latino, Native American, gay, straight, male, female, and it was amazing. We were number one in ratings, number one in revenue. We were driven by equity and equality, and we all succeeded because of that. So I think for somebody like me, my worldview was hard coded 20 years ago, and I find it really frustrating to to still see this as being such a huge problem. And honestly, I'm not trying to be cavalier about it, because I don't necessarily have the personal experience behind this. I try to be an ally. I try to be empathetic. I try to bring action to improving the industry as best I can in my little ways. But I think it's just continuing to get out of this institutionalized over decades issues that we've been dealing with for, but it's literally since the beginning of the industry.
Yeah. It's discrimination across the board. I mean, yes,
Yeah.
it's sexism, but you're right, Doug. It's everything wrapped up into one, because these new forms of creative expression, production, marketing that are then used for marketing, they're challenging the status quo of traditional advertising, and it's giving more people a voice, and that is not only challenging what people think is the right way to do advertising, but it's also giving voice to people are not, well, that's not the masses. This is giving individual voices to much smaller, fragmented groups who need a voice and who become bigger when they are connected to other people like them. And people who are in, not very diverse areas are better for hearing their voice and their creativity. And so I think that we're challenging a lot of notions here. And I think the younger generation, it's not just women, it's also that people are younger. I think that you've got ageism going on here, definitely. Advertising industry does not take young people very seriously, which is bizarre, because oftentimes they're marketing to them.
They don't take old people seriously either, too. I mean, there's a lot of ageism on both sides. It's like they want easily controllable younger people. We know it's good
for everybody, Michelle.
Yeah. The kids, you got to get the kids. But I think influencer marketing is a challenge, and I think that we are starting to come to grips with that. And I think that we're seeing a lot of influencer marketing teams run by women, because this is something that they're damn good at, and they understand what women want to see and what women want to hear. And so they're creating for each other, and they're creating for everybody else too. That we're seeing it across entertainment, we're seeing it across publications as well. Maybe not quite as much as we should be, but in journalism. And I think that it's a speed bump. I think.
Can I play devil's advocate for just a second? Because I'm not that I believe this, but I think it's a salient point to look at what the heart of this argument is, and then look at what the criticism from the ad world is. And essentially what the criticism from the ad world is that this is borrowed interest in most instances. I mean, it's either an endorser or it's some girl in a bikini or on a beach. And it's just like, and for advertising professionals, looking at this, they're going, this is borrowed interest, which is probably the least effective advertising technique. It's very unsophisticated. It uses sexual attraction or fascination with this video game opportunity, or something like you're into food. It's all about the food, and it's just like, and it's not really focused on the product. It's not delivering a powerful message and a brand impression on the customer. So, I mean, is it fair to say that the criticism is rooted in sexism, as opposed to just advertising being on its usual high horse and saying nothing outside of our scope is good advertising?
Well, when you take it from that perspective, Bob, when you're looking at the actual work product and the individuals you have involved, I don't think it's necessarily sexist at that point. I think the mistake is the way that we have approached influencer marketing for the last decade or so. We have consistently decided to judge people based on reach rather than on results. We look at how many impressions there are, how many likes they have, how ginned up they can make their audience over something, versus looking at what's it actually done for the brand. Has there been a lift in any kind of brand score? Has there been an increase in sales? Has there been an increase in awareness? And I think if that's all you're looking for, then fine. But that's not an influencer. That is a spokesperson or a web celebrity, if you will. I think back 11 years ago when we did the Fiesta movement at Ford, one of the earliest influencer marketing efforts out there, and a major one as well. We brought in 100 people, and we were so circumspect about who they were, about where they lived, about what their profile was. I mean, we were split down the middle, male and female. We were in urban and rural markets. We had all kinds of diverse interests and backgrounds and everything, and we bent over backwards to make sure that it was representative of the U.S. population as a whole. The question is, how many brands are actually taking that level of scrutiny and effort versus just slapping together, a sponsorship agreement and throwing it at somebody who's got a good agent?
Yeah, most agencies
go ahead.
treat
Sorry,
this.
Michelle.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
A quick one. You're absolutely right. I think most agencies do influencer marketing really badly. I think that a lot of influencer agencies do influencer marketing really well. And I think that there are some incredibly smart agents out there who understand the benefit of this and understand the opportunity and potential. There's some fantastic people that have come up in LA and other markets. But I think you're right. A lot of brands, media companies, and advertising agencies all collectively looked at this and went, oh, it's another media buy. And that's not about creativity or representation. I totally agree.
And what about
one thing that I learned over the years was that it was treated as part of the marketing portfolio, as opposed to something. It was treated as just another widget in the mix, and it can't be. It can't be done that way. And I think if you're chasing just the almighty number there, then that's going to be really challenging. And Michelle, to your point, talking about Los Angeles, and then you have some of these more urban areas or more big market or coastal areas. There's an agency out of Omaha, Bailey Lauerman, that started an influencer program with people from the middle of the country, and it's been really interesting to see that it's not just what's happening on the coasts that's driving and influencing culture. There's this burgeoning and I would assume very profitable opportunity for the rest of the country and by extension the rest of the world. So yeah. I think if a brand treats it as a portfolio piece, I get it. You want to spread the risk around. That makes total sense. But are you leaving opportunity on the table if you approach it that way?
Yeah, totally. Because it's the same as what happened with social and digital, because that's my background within advertising is, what are we going to do on social for this campaign? What are we going to do on digital? And, I would always groan when I get those briefs. Sorry, everybody listening who used to work with me. But it was so annoying because what if it could have been a social-led campaign? Why does it always have to be a campaign that's TV-driven? For this particular thing. And that you're right. You can't just see it as a thing we have to do and it's part of the mix. Yeah. It's not using it to the best of its potential.
And since we're on the subject, I mean, might as well just continue the conversation into that last topic that I had put into the rundown. I mean, International Women's Day is today. Ironically, as one ad pointed out, it also shortchanged women by 1 hour because of daylight savings time. But what more needs to be done, Michelle? I mean, it's just like, I think we've covered most of it in what you were saying. There's still a dominance by men.
There's still a lot more.
There's still a lot more. So go ahead.
There's like a couple of essays that I wrote in prep for this. But
okay, go.
I wanted to start this section with, can I ask you, because I think in sort of the prep you wrote, Bob, you wrote, considering, what can be done, considering we still have a business dominated by men. And I wanted to ask you guys, like, how personally do you see that? Like, what to you signals that the industry is still dominated by men?
I would say, honestly, it's the holding companies. I mean, it's just like it's executive leadership at the top levels of the biggest agencies out there. It seems to be almost exclusively men. And when you look at creative directors, there's very few creative directors who aren't men still. I mean, there's more of them now, but there's still a lot of male-led creative agencies out there. And that's where I'm getting most of my impressions here. Now, when I go out and I talk to brands, I interact with a lot of women. I mean, it's just like the brands are a lot better about integrating throughout their structure. Most of them are. But when you go into the agencies, it still seems like even though women are rising up to the ranks and getting lots of VP positions and there's more women in advertising than men, hands down, there's more women in advertising than men, the leadership still is representative of the male side of the business.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. I think that's most people's impression of it. And one of my goals is to change the narrative about that, because I think that just looking at statistics gets it doesn't look at the root causal issues behind this or the consequences of this. So, I think we need to start talking less about statistics. I mean, and I'm not dissing the 3% conference or anything like that because it has a statistic in its name. But, what are the repercussions of this? And starting to whittle it down to some really simple to digest consequences or even some scenarios that we start talking about, because as it's a numbers game, I think that we might focus just on the numbers and we're not actually focusing on the systemic issues underneath, because I think that beyond the stats, because I think if we get too focused on the stats without the story, it's kind of like how you can only get so far if you're learning math or chemistry, like if you're just learning by rote. At some point you actually have to understand why you're doing it so you can take control of those numbers. And I think that, we get into a situation where if we don't change the underlying structure of what allows too many people to end up in, say, management positions who are men, like how do we determine whether managers are good? I think we do a really, really bad job of that in ad land right now. I think that there's an awful number of managers who are in management, people who are in management positions who are pretty poor managers. And I think that if we had better structures for how we define what a manager is meant to do, how they're meant to actually support their team, how they're meant to support personal growth, how they're meant to report to the other departments within advertising. I think there's some real like structural changes that need to happen within advertising. And when we put those under scrutiny and we also put the diversity attention that's needed into redefining those processes and into that, under our scrutiny at the same time, that I think you're going to put systems in place that are going to stop it from getting lopsided and skewed again. Because if we just all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but if, even if we put all of this energy into making sure that things are 50-50, we may not change some of the systemic issues that led to it being 80-20 or whatever it is to begin with. And so I think that a lot of this requires a lot more soul searching than just the top level numbers. And I think sometimes by just looking at the top level numbers, we can miss a lot of the actual detail and what happens day to day underneath it as well. So, I mean, like in my mind, primary goal for me is to stop seeing men and women and to just see people for their merits, for their, whether they fit a specific role, their potential. I think we also need to have, diversity attention and make sure that things are equitable in terms of representation. I do, but, we need to get beyond why. We need to start looking at why. And I think, everybody has, good skills. I think we need to look better at where people fit best and not just, continuing to just promote the person up into a management role. This is one example, because they've been there the longest, but look at whether they're actually a natural and good manager and a beneficial manager.
I don't know that been there the longest is always the qualifier, because quite frankly, like I say, you get into your 50s in the advertising business, if you're not in the top level management and have a good set of people around you to keep you safe, I mean, you're out in your ear, at the first possibility of them cutting you. I mean, I think that, really younger people are being elevated too quickly without the mentorship and the understanding of the business that older people could provide in the context. It's totally FUBAR to begin with. And another thing that's interesting to me, and maybe Scott can speak to this point a little bit because of your PR background, this PR doesn't have nearly the same level of problem. In fact, PR is probably closer to what's going on in the influencer space, which is why so much overlap happens in that area. But PR has a lot of female leadership, yet the advertising world looks down their nose at PR too. I mean, is this just coming down to sexism? Or is there something that can actually be fixed relatively easy within the structure of advertising agencies to bring it in alignment with the rest of the business community?
But can I add to that question before you answer, Scott? I'm so sorry. But like also just having the numbers there, does that make it any better for women in PR?
That's a good question. And again, I don't know, Bob, if it can be considered sexist or not. I know just in terms of the practice of PR for ages has not relied on hard numbers for the most part. And that's changing now. And I think, I don't know if that's the reason that it's drawn many women into it. I know a lot of PR has been intuitive and been more empathic. I don't know the cultural reasons why women have traditionally gravitated toward that side of the marketing.
But it's not just the gravitation of it. It's the fact that women elevate very quickly to positions of leadership in the PR space. I mean, they start their own agencies. There's a lot of opportunity within PR.
They populated the lower ranks a lot more than men. It's one of these things of, when you look at the attrition, you look at the elevation of people who are there, then women will stand out because there are more of them in the lower ranks. And good for the leadership within PR and communications firms for advancing women as quickly as they have.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I knew when I brought this subject up, we wouldn't come to any kind of come to Jesus moment of a complete understanding of what they're supposed to do, but it's pretty disheartening sometimes when you look at the way that the structure doesn't seem to ever change. And we've talked about this show so many times. I'm sorry, we've talked about this issue on the show so many times before. We've gone down so many different rabbit holes of understanding this and trying to bring some kind of clarity to the issue, and it just never seems to get solved. Maybe we can turn to Doug Zanger, the agency specialist, who can give us some kind of nugget of insight.
Tell you something. I'll tell you about something. So I obviously I talked about being hardwired 20 years ago at the hip hop station, and it was one of those unexpected moments in my career, in my life, that I value and I cherish. I mean, I honestly do, and I'm nowhere near as successful without the people that were there at that point in my career, and that's, specifically a guy named Ebro, who's at Hot 97 and Beats One on Apple Music. He doesn't like taking credit for this, but he is largely responsible for the fact that he gave me. There's a difference between getting an opportunity and getting a shot. And I think what tends to get hung up in this industry is that people get opportunities. Opportunity is really, working within a system and working within the walls of that system, and you might move up a little bit quickly. But if you have a good manager, to Michelle's point, if you have a manager that identifies something in you and they look at you and say, I'm going to give you your shot, that's a chance for you to really elevate. That's a chance for you to really soar. And so I was languishing, and Ebro saw something in me. He gave me my shot. I was a morning show producer, or for Michelle, breakfast chat show producer, as it were.
Yeah, thanks.
But that was something that gave me confidence, and there are millions of stories that I have in those 5-year stretch, and some of them not appropriate for this family show, but they were formative moments, and they helped build this foundation. Now, one of the things that I try to do as an editor is representation in the insight that we're getting from people. So if we're talking about doing interviews, if we're talking about our Brand Stars event, if you take a look at everything that we're trying to do, in addition to diversity and inclusion, in terms of just that pure play coverage of that part of the industry, I speak for myself, and I think my editor David Greiner, who is truly wonderful, we make it a point to make sure that we are trying to get as many voices as we can from different backgrounds, from varied backgrounds. And I think that we end up having this echo chamber, and you can see it on any stage. It's like you can go from conference to conference and see the same people over and over and over again, and they're all talking about transformation and disruption and whatever shun they have going on at the moment. But I feel it's very important to make sure that we're trying to get more of those voices in, because to Michelle's point, even though you have somebody who might have a title, people in this industry will have similarly strong opinions that you've never necessarily heard from before. And I'm not out there trying to signpost it. That's the thing. I want people to discover that what we're trying to do is to get as many voices with very different backgrounds as much as we can into our daily coverage. And I think you get to a point where you look up and you think, you say, oh, if you look at imagery on the site, it's not just white men. And there's still going to be that. I mean, let's just face it. That's still going to be a thing. But if we can continue, and I can continue to make an effort to make sure that I'm included, and I very bluntly tell people, I really want to try to get as much variety in the insight that I'm getting here or conducting an interview with. Sometimes it's unavoidable because it's a very specific thing, but as much as we can do that, then we can in a way advocate, because what we're doing is showing that there are these people you may never have heard of before that have a lot of smart things to say and are really smart people and deserve that chance to be heard.
Great. That to me is such a nice articulation beyond the statistics. When you get more representation from diverse people, you get more opinions that are different than your own. You get different ideas. That's a really good way of framing it. So the stat might be the impetus to hire more diverse employees. And then the benefit is that you get different opinions. The systemic change that needs to happen in agencies is not just in the hiring process, which is also inherently biased, but is to, once you hire those people, to let them voice
and elevate them,
to help them grow.
Yeah. Elevate them as well, because it's just like you can hire a diverse workforce, but if your leadership is still kind of inside a little bubble. They're not going to be leading the agency in a direction that's in any way inclusive or diverse.
But there's a lot of people whose voices need to be heard right now within ad agencies. And because of some of the systemic issues and operations, they do not get heard. And so if you hire a bunch of new people who may be from more diverse backgrounds, they're going into that same machine. What's to say that those people versus some of the people that are screaming right now within the industry are going to be any more heard. So that's what I mean by, we've also got to look at what allows people their voice. How do we get better, performance review management processes, for example? How do we actually listen to, and plan for that person's career and make sure communication is better? And, I think that we need to look at that as well. Yeah.
And here, Bob, we land back at where we were at the top of the show when Doug was talking about operational talent within agencies.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the show always goes full circle. We know that. But before we get off that circle, I do want to go to our last topic real quick. Fleets are a new thing. Twitter is testing in Brazil their own version of stories, which they're calling fleets. So we're running late on time, Scott, but tell me your thoughts here. Is this simply them playing catch up, or could it actually offer something that's really unique and potentially valuable for marketers?
Yes. Well, I don't know if it will answer anything of value for marketers. It's Twitter playing catch up. They are very late to the game, obviously. But here's the interesting thing to me is that they're doing this to answer, not necessarily that other tech brands are doing this, other platforms are doing it, but to answer the need where people don't feel comfortable when they join Twitter putting themselves out there. Whether they don't want to be ridiculed or they don't feel like they have anything useful to say, this is a way that is a little more protective of that privacy and lets them, share these in a non-permanent way and to begin to create conversations with their friends behind the scenes. And herein, I think Twitter, yes, they've waited too long for this. However, for them to launch it in an election year when people may be very hesitant to say what they want based on seeing, Twitter flame wars going down, that could be something that actually works in their favor.
Yeah, I think so. And with that, it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Michelle Excel. You can find her at theantipodean.us. Tell us, Michelle, what's going on in your world? What would you like to promote?
Well, I'm still heading to Austin. So for anyone who listens to this week, after you publish it, then I'm going to be around. So I'll be saying hi to all my agency friends and having a little bit of a vacation as well, which is very nice. First time my husband's going to be coming out because I'll actually be able to pay him attention, which is great. And then we're talking about teleconferencing and immersive technology and how that can take off in this current climate. Come talk to me about that. I translate, I whisper between the heavy tech, immersive tech world and the agency world. And I would love to get some pilots and some prototypes and just testing some new ways of doing things.
Yeah, you definitely want to meet with Michelle if you have any interest in that space, but just go meet with her because she's a lot of fun. So that's a good reason to meet her. Now, next up, we have Scott Monty. You can find him at scottmonty.com. Tell us, Scott, what's going on in your world? What would you like to promote?
Well, I am continuing to help brands and agencies think beyond the shiny object and provide them with timeless strategies. I mentioned the Fiesta movement earlier. I mean, that's a concept that could be brought to life today just as much as it was 11 years ago because the strategy is sound. And that's what I help brands do, is to look for those strategies that withstand the test of time. And I also write about that stuff on my newsletter, Timeless and Timely, which you can subscribe to at scottmonty.com.
Yeah, Scott is a smart man. You definitely want to get hooked up with his writing and his work and go see him speak and all that other stuff. So last but not least, Doug Zanger. You can find him writing for a little magazine called Adweek, which is at adweek.com. Tell us what's going on in your world, Doug. What do you want to promote?
Fastest growing agencies, our second year of that. Last year was wonderful. It was nice to actually have a moment to stop and celebrate the growth of agencies around the world. And so we'll be starting in on that fairly soon. Just watch adweek.com for that. Portland Timbers, we are into Major League Soccer season, so I just want to say if you're looking for a soccer team, by all means, support the Portland Timbers. They will disappoint you. I'm just forewarning you, but we could use a few more. And before we go, I want to see if Michelle can answer this question in 10 seconds or less, if you can indulge me for 1 second, Bob. Michelle, who invented the pavlova, New Zealand or Australia? And you have 10 seconds. Go.
And I can't swear, right? I'm not allowed to swear on the show.
Correct.
Oh man, look, I'm going to give it to both of them.
Oh, that's hedging.
No, do you know what my company name is? My company, the Antipodean, means somebody who's from Australia and or New Zealand, and I'm from both countries. So I'm the person who should be hedging. I don't take sides. I don't take sides, and I don't take sides in either of this.
I only say this.
Any of this.
I only say this because the kids' godparents are from New Zealand, so you
yeah,
are
of course. New Zealanders New Zealanders get upset when they get called Australians, and Australians go, "Oh, that's funny." No, so that's probably just offended all of New Zealanders. But listening, but I'm both, and I'll stay that way. Yeah,
that's fair.
As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me, and of course, you can find out how to advertise on the program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it is time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, the fair of the week. My friends at Smucker's did something really, really kind of interesting. They waded into the GIF versus GIF debate. Now, you know, the GIF format for images, is it pronounced GIF? Is it pronounced GIF? The battle rages on. They weighed in with a co-branded effort with Giphy, you know, the GIF. I'm not going to wade into that GIF sharing platform. And they had one side of Jif peanut butter that says Jif, a creamy peanut butter, GIF, something that you share online. So they've come down firmly, Scott, on the favor of Jif being the peanut butter and the graphic image file being a GIF. I think this is really great as far as an influencer effort. I mean, it got sent to the right people. It created a lot of conversation. These things were showing up. These jars of peanut butter were showing up on eBay and going for hundreds of dollars. I mean, it was really very effective at creating a sensation throughout a certain segment of the community.
Yeah, the only thing that surprised me, Bob, is that it took them so long to jump on this topic. I mean, it's been a hot issue of debate for years, and people always reference Jif, the peanut butter, as one of their proof points. So kudos for them for actually getting on board with this finally.
Yeah, and it was a real person who first shared that I saw, by the way, not an advertising agency person. So I love it when that happens, when I find out about like advertising campaigns from like real people in my friend network. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really great. Now, the fail of the week goes to the Trump campaign, who actually went far enough into the misleading ads that even Facebook, with all its no interference, high ground, high-mindedness, had to step in and say, no, you can't do that. They were running ads, Doug, designed to mislead people into thinking that they were participating in the U.S. Census, saying, we want you to take this census of your district, you know, find out how to support President Trump. I forget the exact words, but this is like clearly pretty awful advertising when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I don't know if there's really much more to add to this, but the question that begs to be answered is, will Facebook really care? I just don't know. I'm so exhausted with all of this that I shouldn't be, because
I hear it in your voice.
Yes,
we all feel
because complacency can lead to the end of democracy. So I should be more fired up about this, but in all seriousness, I just hope that Facebook and digital everything writ large takes a much closer look at this and really actually does some self-policing before the people in Washington, D.C. decide it for them. And there needs to be material progress on this very, very quickly. But it's just, you know, they're just going to keep chipping away at it. It's not going to stop, but I'm going to be interested to see what the reactions are from all of these platforms.
And now for the foul of the week. The battle between New York City and Link NYC over the rollouts of internet hotspots to replace payphone booths throughout the city has taken a really, really bad turn here, Michelle. I mean, the rollout has stopped since 2018. The company Link NYC is asking for more money, and NYC saying you owe us money, and they've got this ad revenue coming in from all these ads that are running on these kiosks, and none of that money's making it back to the city. And the Link NYC saying it's costing more to roll this out, and they've been working through the details. This sounds like a production nightmare.
It sounds like anything that's, I guess, trying to change based on super old infrastructure as well. I'm not surprised. It could be true. I mean, God knows how crazy the infrastructure is. I don't know what, do real people want them to go away? That my only question, like the actual debacle about it is, yes, it's getting messy and it's ridiculous, and it will probably stall for a while, but it will sort itself out in the long run. But I mean, this happened we haven't had phone booths in New Zealand, at least for, I don't know how many, well over a decade. So I was very surprised to hear that there were still actual payphones left in a country.
Oh, there were no functional payphones. They were just locations.
No,
it was
just locations.
Just
okay,
locations.
So this is really
yeah.
just about the actual getting them up and operational. Then?
Yeah, this is just about getting them up and running, and it's just like, and they've had so many. I mean, they've been in the fails that we run on this show constantly since they came out. I mean, when they first rolled out, they were being used as public internet porn kiosks for homeless people. So, I mean, it's just like there were so many struggles with getting this off and running. But I think the most interesting part is that they are making a lot of money on the ads, yet the city's not seeing any of the money. And yet Link NYC says that the bureaucracy and the craziness of working with the city has proved to be so expensive that they need the money to continue rolling out these devices. Yet none of the devices have rolled out since 2018. So it just goes on and on.
Somebody did not draft the contract very well, is what it sounds like. It sounds like, actually, to be honest, sounds like a bunch of people who didn't really understand the ramifications signing off on something. And yeah, like often, you know, when you had the debates when like Zuckerberg was in Congress, getting quizzed, and the questions he was being asked were just like, what is that person asking them? That's not even how the internet works. Seems a bit like that, maybe.
Sounds like a classic New York City real estate deal, too.
Hey, I got some air rights I want to sell you. Well, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. And that does it for this marathon episode of the BeanCast. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
beans.